People are tired of COVID. Everybody wants to just move on. Why in the world do people still keep talking about this virus? Isn't it over? Hasn't the pandemic passed? Haven't we moved beyond it? Nobody wants to hear about it anymore. That is a recurring theme. And even when I did a detailed search looking at, say, Reddit to try and understand what people are thinking, this is exactly how they feel. They're tired of it. They don't want to hear about it anymore. And I understand that. The problem is that it hasn't really gone away. And even though we would like to move on from it, it's still there. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you the final message that Geert had to say on the 22nd of December. And I'm going to share with you some of my insights as I've interviewed Geert the most since 2021, as the first to interview him in March of 2021. That video had 1.6 million views and is still being watched today. And it's important because you have to remember where he's coming from. So, this is what he had said at the time. And it is about when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This is from Sherlock Holmes. And this was done on the 22nd of December 2025. And what is happening is that Geert is now really frustrated. People are challenging and criticizing what he has said because timelines don't necessarily fit in boxes. I do think that when I spoke to him, I wished he hadn't said any timelines because I know how complex it is in terms of disease presentation. But when we think about timelines, you have to remember where he's coming from. So I'll give you some insight here. So, what he said is that the science surrounding the evolution of the SARS CoV 2 immune escape pandemic has increasingly been reduced to a matter of belief. You either believe it or you don't, which is pretty simple. And no one listens to that weird guy. He's talking about himself here because so many people have criticized him over the time. And this weird guy, Gert, has consistently argued that mass vaccination of entire populations during an active pandemic using vaccines that neither provided sterilizing immunity, that means failed to eliminate virus infected cells, nor match the circulating viral variant from the outset, would have disastrous consequences. And he said as early as March 2021, I think I spoke to him on the 23rd. He sent a message to the WHO on the 24th to reconsider and to be warned about the risks associating with rolling out a large scale COVID 19 vaccination program because he was concerned about viral escape. The truth is that a lot of people still say what he said in 2021 hadn't borne out. They still don't accept that that was right. And that's a problem because if you didn't even think what he said in the first place was correct, there is no way you would listen to him beyond. So, just in case you're one of those doubters, what I've done is I've gotten together the genetic transformation of SARS-CoV-2 from 2020. A very interesting website here called nextstrain.org. And this is what it looks like. They were looking at the genomic epidemiology of SARS-CoV-2 with subsampling focused globally, not just for over the past 6 months, but they have been doing it since 2020. And sadly, on the 1st of October 2025, they received an email stating they will no longer be updating this. So this information is now going to be hidden from you. So, just so that you get it clear, this may be one of the few times you get to look at it. This is where we started. That was the Wuhan variant in January of 2020. And you can see that there are a number of variants here that occurred. And this is going along into 2021. This happened. You had the Lambda, you had the Delta, And this is in 2021. So there are a number of variants, but look carefully at this section here. So already this should have been a concern when these variants started to pop up. 2022, you then start to see the evolution of the Omicron variants. And then, boom, this is where we are now. Oh my goodness. Look at all these variants. An explosion of variants that were coming from the original here. There is no way you can keep up with vaccines that would be able to encompass all of these variants that are going. So when you look at it and when you contemplate it, when you think of Geert, just imagine the fact that in effect, I'm unable to get this bigger. Yep, I think I got it a bit bigger. And take a look at it. Let me just try and see if I can get it bigger so that you can see it. Just remember that this happened beyond 2022. All of these variants, this is an explosion. This is, in effect, way worse than Geert could have imagined. This is a huge explosion of variants. Now, some people may say this was not because of the mass vaccination program. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but are you saying this is normal? This doesn't happen with all other viruses, I am sure. And to consider the fact that you have been producing more and more variants of the vaccine and it cannot keep up. In case you were forgotten, this is what it looks like now. There are all these variants that have been produced. There are just so many of them. There is no way if we were doing alpha, beta, lambda, delta, we would have run out of variants long ago. This is why they use numbers. This is how significant it is. So when we go back, you have to remember what he said in 2021. He formally urged the WHO to reconsider and be warned about the risks of rolling out this large-scale COVID-19 program. Okay? So I'm positioning this because this is part of the reason why I still listen to Geert. Is that, yeah, I understand that some of the things he said may not have happened yet, but now I want you to think about this here, just in case you're getting confused about it. Remember, he said this in 2021, so around here, and we already had some variants. Look how long it took for this explosion to occur. So from 2021 here to where we have seen this massive explosion beyond 2025, this is almost 4 years. So this is important, because timelines are not so easy to predict when we're talking about what is happening. So this is important to position before you move on. So he went on to say that nearly 5 years later, it is evident that the public and global health authorities have failed to grasp a central immunological fact. Vaccine-induced immunity in the context of widespread vaccine breakthroughs infections does not confer herd immunity. Okay, let's pause there a second. What effectively he's saying is that when you have the vaccines, the injectable vaccines, for one, they're not very good at stimulating the upper airway mucosal immunity. And so therefore, they are not going to lead to herd immunity. The purpose of those vaccines, in case anyone forgot, was to reduce the risk of severe COVID-19. That was the aim. That was the target. It wasn't really about stopping the pandemic. What happened is that they were so excited about some of the relative risk reduction that somebody in politics and finance and pharma decided to push this on whole populations with the flawed information that it would stop transmission of the virus. Many people will deny that's what they said, but that's what they thought. It was the only reason you would dare to mandate it, because you stopped it would you thought it would stop transmission. There was no other reason to give it to somebody who was low risk or somebody who had already had an infection. So they're trying to change the narrative. But at the time, it was flawed science. They got it wrong. They didn't realize that it didn't stimulate mucosal immunity. And so, therefore, it could never have been sterilizing. This is very, very important because if it couldn't stop the virus, you then have a situation where what happens when the virus infects again and again and again and again and again? Are we looking at the same disease? Now, remember, I've said this before, and I think it's a useful analogy. When you think of varicella zoster, which causes chickenpox, first infection, rash all over the body, especially in children. Reactivation of the same virus, you get shingles, completely different disease presentation. This is how it works. So you're not seeing severe COVID-19 because the whole world either has natural immunity or hybrid immunity. But you're getting infection after infection after infection after infection. What disease does that lead to? That's the question nobody seems to be wanting to ask. And this is why, even though it's tempting for me to just say, you know what, people are tired of hearing about COVID, let's move on and talk about GLP-1 agonists or, some other random health-related thing. I realize that there is almost a responsibility to keep people focused on this because it is going to do so much harm. You cannot believe how bad this is going to get. And as I tell you, if you don't understand time frames, let me remind you again, this is what time frames look like. Geert predicted it in 2021. This is what it looks like in 2025. When I tell you in 2025, going on to 2026, that there is going to be an explosion of all kinds of diseases because of reinfection after reinfection after reinfection, after variant after variant after variant, imagine what I'm saying now looks like this. In 5 years' time, it's going to look like this in terms of disease presentation. So, yeah, you could ignore it certainly for another few years. And you may laugh that, come on, Dr. McMillan is talking about this still. Geert is talking about it still. Who cares? We are not yet sick. That's the problem. Yet. And so there is almost a responsibility to ignore the fact that people do criticize these points. So here is what he said again, emphasizing this. However, all of these outcomes are likely to be overshadowed by a far more catastrophic consequence: the relentless viral immune escape that has been the common thread throughout this immune escape pandemic. As he pointed out, with the advent of Omicron, immune derailment became irreversible. The immune responses were refocused in a manner that did not control viral spread, but instead continuously increased immune pressure on the virus first, on its infectiousness. Now, this is something that is very complex. And this is why when I spoke with Geert, I had to listen, reflect, research, analyze, and then come back to it again. It is very complex science. So I'm not going to try and go over it, but I'll tell you what, the science makes sense. Now, I can't tell you it is absolutely going to happen or when it's going to happen, but based on everything that he pointed out, the way how the immune system is layered and how layer after layer is being stripped back, and when nothing is left, this is where he is concerned that there is going to be a shift in virulence of the virus. Now, this is an important point here. So in which steadily rising immune pressure forces the virus towards a qualitative evolutionary shift into virulence, so-called Omicron. a highly virulent Omicron variant, precipitating a major hyperacute pandemic event. Now, I think this is part of the problem in that that's the prediction based on the science. What I've learned is that the way how disease presents in people is very unusual. It changes from person to person, from group to group, from comorbidity to comorbidity. So I suspect that what he is expecting with that variant is not going to look the way that he's anticipating it. And I think this is part of the problem, but it doesn't change the science. So here is where I was talking about it differently. It's almost like layers of failure. And, in order to understand this, I'm going to go back to a presentation that I did on Hivicron, and you'll realize why I made layers of failure. So you have to just give me a couple of minutes here while I find this presentation so I can show you an image, because I think it would make sense if you saw this image and you realize why I think that part of the problem that Geert is having is that the prediction is not taking into consideration some of these nuances about how disease presents, dependent on the individual or group of individuals. So here is what I had done when I had done this presentation. I found this image. I'm going to show it to you here. And this is more like what we see clinically. Okay, so I am able to not just hear the science from Gert, but also reflect on the clinical presentation of disease. And here we have what I consider the full spectrum of when or if this Hivicron appears, what it will look like. Now, you have some people who have relatively good immunity, and they will have what I call the persistent infection. They just get infection after infection after infection. They're the ones who you're talking to this Christmas, and they got another infection. They had one a few months ago, and it just keeps on going. But because their immune system is still quite resilient, they are okay with it. Okay. Now, the next phase that I had said was the immune dysregulation. And these people now start to have things going wrong with them, where not little things, but things that don't seem to be connected start happening. And that's because now the viral infection is driving immune dysregulation. Then they shift into what I described as smoldering inflammation. They are just kind of all the time not well, but they can't identify necessarily what's happening. And in this phase, I describe that when you do their inflammatory markers, that they are mildly elevated, but you can't find anything specific wrong with them. Then it moves into what I call the metabolic collapse. This is now where people get properly sick. Sometimes a few weeks after they've had an infection, they may have a heart attack, they may have another significant pneumonia, they may have a stroke, they have all kinds of serious things going wrong. This is where you then have the cancer turning up, all of these things. And people don't realize that this is a progressive, stepwise process. You roll from this to this to this to this, and this can sometimes take years, depending on where you started. And then the final stage, I know this is where I think Geert was talking about, that final stage, which we do also see, is that end stage viral sepsis. Literally, people get sick, and no matter what you do, they just die. I can't explain it in a way. You can't control the fact that they are going to die. This is an important clinical point. A lot of people don't understand it. And the view is that if somebody is sick, if they've got an infection or whatever, usually if we want to keep them alive, we can. We can give them antibiotics, we can give them inotropes, we can do all kinds of things. We can even put them on intensive care, and we can do things that will keep them alive. What is happening now is that there is a cohort of patients, and at the moment it is small, that you cannot keep alive, even if you wanted to. They just die. And you can't even put your finger on why they have died. This is what I suspect is what Geert is talking about when he made reference to this stage of this. And this here is where this major pandemic hyperacute event, I think that this is what he means. The problem is that it varies with regards to where a population is and how heavily the virus is circulating and where an immune system is at the time. And so what I expect to happen, so my understanding of what Geert is saying is that one, I suspect that even the Omicron is layered. So the virus that comes along and infects will then knock on to different variants so that the immune system can't control it. But here is one scenario that I think we have to therefore be concerned about when we think of the Omicron variants. Part of the reason why I think the Omicron variant is unlikely to do what the Delta variant did is because it has a predilection for the upper airways and the upper parts of the lungs and the bronchi and the bronchioles. The difference with the Delta variant was that it spread rapidly throughout the lungs. If, however, a variant comes up that does the similar kind of immune suppression that Omicron is doing and the reinfection, and has the capability of infecting immune cells deep in the lungs, that's the beast that Geert is talking about, because then you will see very hyperacute presentation of respiratory mediated disease where people can't breathe very quickly. It's not really what we're seeing at the moment, sometimes, but it's not the pattern. You're seeing almost a much broader presentation of disease, but people still die. And this is why my anticipation is that this is going to be more like a storm surge or the tide coming in. You're standing out on the beach, half a mile out, if you've been to a beach like that. The tide seems to be coming in slowly, but suddenly, before you know it, it's up to your knees, then it's up to your waist, and you have to rush back in. That's how I anticipate this is going to happen. And when I look back at what the prediction was in 2021, just as a reminder here, this is where he predicted the immune escape pandemic. In 2021, in March, this is what it looks like in 2025. So you had a lot of people who, even when Omicron came, they denied it. Even when a few variants of Omicron came, they denied it. That's 2023. There are a few more variants of Omicron, they denied it. In 2025, if you say this is not relevant, I don't know what else would convince you. And so this is where the timeline from March of 2021 to about March of 2025, that is 4 years. So don't discount it too early. That's the problem. And based on everything that I am looking at from a research point of view, looking at the patterns that are occurring in terms of hospital admissions, because I've got the data that I can look at it, we are seeing a change in trajectory of disease. And knowing and understanding exactly where it's going to turn up or what's going to happen next is very, very difficult. But you are better to err on the side of preparedness, of being aware that this can happen and hoping it doesn't happen. As Geert has said many times, Even though he's upset when people criticize him, he would rather to be wrong about this, because the implications of being completely right are so horrific. Just a reminder as a final thought. The flu pandemic in 1918, the first wave was a very virulent virus, killed 2 million people. At the time, they didn't even know viruses existed. So they were doing all kinds of strange stuff. They were using lots of aspirin. They were using bacterial vaccines, all kinds of things to try and prevent the next phase. The next phase of the 1918 flu pandemic was 50 million deaths. And that was about a year, 18 months after the first wave. Listen, we don't want anything like that to happen. But believe me, at the rate things are going and the way how things are being ignored, this doesn't look good. And therefore, we all should be prepared. Even though a lot of people are tired of hearing about COVID, you need to at least know something in case the worst were to happen. That's not necessarily the message you want to hear at the beginning of the new year, but in truth, I'm worried that this is a trajectory that's only going to get worse. I'd like to say have a good evening, but let's try and see if we can be prepared. Thank you.
A hero, an immune adventure, Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.